Hello everyone, this is part 2 of the video where I'm going through the political compass, so I'm just going to jump right in, and obviously you kind of should watch part 1, but it doesn't really matter what order you watch them in, so I suppose it doesn't really matter. Let's get into it. Alright, so, schools should not make classroom attendance compulsory. Strongly disagree. I am going for the stronglies here a lot more often, except for the abortion issue. Yeah, so I do not support homeschooling. I don't support private schools. I think that it's really important as a society that we have a shared identity, that people grow up believing the same values, that people grow up kind of having the same story, the same myth of our society. And part of that needs to be reinforced in school. It needs to be done collectively. So I think that everyone should have to attend. And, I actually don't even, for reasons relating to the fact that I think that, lessons and kind of classes in school should be highly modular. I don't really support bank holidays either. So obviously in the UK, I guess the thing, people get like days off on like Monday, often, sometimes Friday. For me, I think that every single school week should be Monday to Friday, because then that means like, obviously you're going to be learning different lessons each day of the week. And if it just so happens that like, you have certain lessons falling on Monday, that means you wouldn't be doing those lessons that week, and that doesn't really make much sense. But yeah, very much enthusiast for the fact that kids should be going to school. That is our one chance. And you look at how society is right now, you look at how divided people are, you look at how much people just don't agree on things. Our one chance to counteract that effectively is when the state, as a representative of the public, as a representative of, I guess you could say like, or an enforcer of a wider social contract, can say, no, this is what we believe as a society, these are our values. So I think it's absolutely vital to not waste that opportunity by saying, oh, you don't even have to show up if you don't want. All people have their rights, but it is better for all of us that different sorts of people should keep to their own kind. Disagree, right? I'm just trying to... It's kind of like a weird, like, the extra stuff here is a bit confusing to me. Like, okay, so you're saying everyone has their rights, awesome. So I guess this is about like segregation, which of course, because like I guess you could say separate but equal. Everyone has their equal rights, but yeah, I think that's complete nonsense, right? I'm just going to say strongly disagree. I can't even think of any situation where wait, I'm stopping myself short there. I do think that maintaining a sense of national identity is important for a society, and part of that means you can't just immediately blur everything. Right? If tomorrow we literally said every single society is going to have an equal representation, like a global population of Indians, Chinese, Mexicans, Germans, Americans, like Ethiopians, whatever, and we're just going to like have every single society just be a complete melting pot, I actually think that would not be good. So I'm going to say just mildly disagree, because while I do think it is good to have the UK as it is, with all sorts of people coming together around a shared value, around a similar nationality. And I do think, obviously I know, Johnny Wilbeck. No, I do think that black people, and people from all sorts of different backgrounds can be English, and by extension they can be British. So that is true. But the problem is, I also think that if you have every single person coming in all at once, like Danny Welbeck, I believe, someone said he's, when they were complaining about me saying that he's English in one of my recent videos, they said, he's he's actually Ghanaian. Alright, well, he's not. He was born in England, he's been raised in England, he's got an English accent, he's a Londoner. It just, like, that whole thing makes no sense to me, because, like, is he a Londoner? Yeah, obviously he is. He's got the culture, the values of London. Alright, well, where is London? Oh, it's in England. So if he's got the cultures and the values and I guess that's really all that matters, right? The culture and the values of, and I guess like the citizenship too, of that place in England. How can you say he's not by extension English? It just doesn't really make any sense to me. Like if someone has the culture and the values of Rome, they're Italian because they are a Roman. Or, maybe it would have been better go like Venetian, because obviously Roman kind of means a different thing. Anyway. So yeah, but having said that, if the UK was suddenly just filled with Ghanaians, well, at that point, we're not actually talking about the UK anymore. At that point, we're talking about Ghana. So there's that, but it's kind of, and people might say, oh, well, isn't that paradoxical, right? You're saying, if you're saying one Ghanaian can be English, then surely if 65 million Ghanaians came to the UK, then that would just make the UK a country filled with 65 million Ghanaian people who are nonetheless English. But obviously, of course there are like we literally have the ship of Theseus for this. It is possible that somebody can join a group and become part of that group, even though if that group was literally entirely replaced with people like them, we would all recognize it as now a new distinct group. Yeah, the ship of Theseus, great example. If you replace the steering wheel on a ship, we wouldn't say, like we would now say, well, that is the ship's steering wheel. But if you replace every single part of a ship, we would recognize that's a new ship. So yeah, in the exact same sense, it applies here. Actually, I've got my headphones plugged. I'm wearing my headphones for this, just because obviously usually, like I've kind of got this, as far as I'm concerned, like my reaction format. Like I'm recording my screen, I'm kind of, looking at myself in my thing to see how I will appear for you guys. But I'm not listening to anything, which usually I would be, but whatever. Anyway, so good parents sometimes have to spank their children. This is a complicated one, because I don't know, right? Like I'm not a parent. I've never, but I'll point out a few things. One, this is, in my view, massively relevant to class, right? If you have so I would like to think that I will not have to spank my children, but that's because I am expecting that one, my wife and I collectively will be earning a reasonably good wage, and two, we will both have the ability to work from home. There are other couples I know that also have, like a lot of the other kind of middle class families I know, couples I know, also have a lot of ability to work from home, and that means that I think you just have much more free, like you can, with that free time, you can sort out things in the house, you can, make sure the dishes are done, the washing's done, and all of like the fact you don't just have to get home and you've immediately, like you've not been in the house all day, you've immediately got to get on top of everything. Maybe your kids are already home, maybe you had to pick them up on like basically, and of course, I'm assuming this is the point where your kids are at school. Obviously before then it's even like totally different matter. The fact that you have all of that free time and that ability to be much more present in the house, I think gives you the ability to have more control over things, such that you can, like, you don't have to be as direct in the way you discipline your kids. Whereas conversely, if you are working really hard, you're struggling to make ends meet, you get home and you're already really stressed, and then you've got a kid and they're not behaving, and like, I can understand just being like, no, like, I can't sit down and have like a conversation with my kid about why I need to behave. No, I'm just gonna have to like hit them. Just say, you do the bad thing, you get hit. That's the really simple equation here. Now, having said that, I think that we should obviously have more family-friendly policies in this country. I think we should be aiming for a situation where that's not necessary. But, yeah, I think I'm going to say agree. I'll lock in agree, because I do think in our current society, I can understand why someone does. I think it's when we're talking about spanking, right? This is not something really, like serious. Having said that, I mean, there's something I thought about recently. It never really occurred to me. It was kind of like a bit of a weird moment. Parents don't need to get mad at their kids, right? Like, I think you could actually raise a child, and when they do bad things, because being angry, it's kind of one of those things, I do meditation, I do Zen and all that kind of stuff. And obviously one of the things you realize is that emotions are choices. You can express extreme disappointment with your child. You can express an extreme sense of what your child has done is very wrong. You don't have to get angry at them. To be angry is a feeling, an emotion you are choosing to have. So that was kind of like a weird moment to me. But yeah, I should say, by the way, just for the record, I was myself spanked as a child. My wife was also spanked as a child. I know people who spank their kids, so I don't think this is some like horrifying thing, because it's just like, from my perspective, it didn't really bother me. But I do think it's certainly less than ideal. And I also think sometimes it can be used in a context where actually you could have understood, like you could actually get somewhere by having a conversation instead. But again, that is assuming you have the time. It's assuming you have the kind of emotional availability, which you may not have if, depending on your situation. So yeah, and of course, that's why I'd say what we should be aiming for is a situation where we do. And of course, I mean, there's also the fact that schools aren't pulling their weights, right? School isn't disciplining kids properly. So when kids get to like spend 7 hours a day being able to completely run amok, run amok, and not get in any trouble whatsoever, well, it's going to be like, what are you going to do as a parent when you get home and you're like, oh, okay, like this is what I have to deal with. So I think that schools should get more strict and kind of set the standard, because of course schools shouldn't be hit. I don't believe in corporal punishment at schools, but I do think that schools should still set the tone for this is how you discipline kids, and that needs to be where the focus lies, so that there can then be a sense of, oh, if you're a parent, we've kind of already like worked with how to deal with misbehaving kids, basically, is my thought. Anyway, it's natural for children to keep some secrets from their parents. Strongly agree. I'll say agree, because no, obviously I think there are literally people who are full on just like pedologic groomers who are like, no, it's actually really awesome if you have some like online friends and you never mention them to your parents, and you confide in them a lot and tell them a lot of emotionally vulnerable things, and you don't tell your parents. But it's like, obviously that's groomer logic. Like, oh, why are they saying that? Why are they saying, oh, you should have like some online friends who maybe you talk to and you form a very strong connection to, and maybe they're a 30, 40-year-old man. Oh, okay, it's interesting you think that. I think clearly there are some secrets they need to keep, right? I think it would be weird for children to tell their parents everything. But I do think that parents and kids should have a very open relationship where they are able to talk with each other a lot about like mental issues, and even, like the sex thing. I think that should be certainly it's a conversation that children should be having with their parents rather than anyone else. But to say that they shouldn't have any secrets, I think would be kind of crazy, because I just can't even imagine how that would work. Maybe I could like go down to disagree and say, well, actually really you shouldn't have that many, but I think I'm happy with agree. Possessing marijuana for personal use should not be a criminal offense. Strongly disagree. Well, I don't know. No, okay, actually, you know what? We'll do disagree. So if this was selling drugs, I think selling drugs absolutely should be a criminal offense. Possessing, I don't know, I'm talking myself out of it now. I wanted to go for that because, I'm against. We live in a world now where there are people who actively think that we should legalize the buying and selling of drugs. And because I'm against that, my instinct is when I see something along those lines, I'm like, well, strongly disagree. Having said that, of course, criminal offense, well, what? So, like, you go to prison for having some, like, marijuana using for personal use? No, I think there should be maybe some way of making it so if someone possesses that, they should be obligated to give information about where they got it from. I think I'm happy to say it should be so I'm assuming criminal offense like that can include like fines. So I don't think someone should be going to prison for possessing marijuana for personal use, but I think they could be getting community service and fines, and obviously that more leniently if they are able to give information about the person who supplied them the marijuana. Because what we want to do is get rid of the people who are actually distributing it. So, all right. The prime function of schooling should be to equip the future generations to find jobs. Okay, here we go. Strongly disagree. No. I keep saying that and I keep realizing how I hate having such nuanced politics. No. Because I'm just like, so here's the thing. I have an incredibly so here's the thing, right? This is where it gets really weird, because I have like this strange combination of beliefs. From primary to secondary school, and even into A-level, I think that schooling, so I think I can say strongly disagree, but it's very complicated, because again, I think that schooling should very much be about, like, education for education's sake. The best example of that is I think schools should be learning Latin. I think schools should be teaching Latin. I don't care that it's not useful. I think that it connects us to our culture, it connects us to our history. I think that it is kind of, in and of itself, evocative of being educated, and that is of equal, if not greater value to simply the ability to know useful stuff. I also think a lot of the problem with like this whole equipping to find jobs. So there's two issues. One, this is the state subsidizing employers, right? If you're an employer, you should be in charge of training people to do the jobs. Because you're the one who wants them to be trained. That's what you should do. Two, Obviously, it means that a lot of kids might end up completely wasting their time. Everyone says, "Oh, maths is," or like the other thing I hear all the time is like, "Oh, we know lots of people do coding now. Lots of people work with computers, so we should really focus on teaching kids about computers." Okay, but the problem is, if that's your focus, then for all the many kids who aren't going to ever go into learning about computers, they are completely wasting their time because that's not going to be of any use to them whatsoever. So that's why I would say it should be a generalized thing. But absolutely no, I have that view of the kind of the idealistic aesthetic of being educated, where, you know, like basically people are sat around smoking pipes, wearing smoking jackets indeed, by a little fire in their armchairs, talking about Latin and just being able to, it's so fun when you know a bit of Latin, because it just makes you seem so smart. My wife recently was like, we were talking about the fact we're flying out on Friday the 13th. And Tracy was talking about, that's the name of her mum, was talking about how she's been praying for us, and then said, "Oh, don't worry about Friday 13th because we're not superstitious." And then my wife Hannah was like, "No, we're Godstitious. You know what I mean? We don't worry about Friday 13th. We worry about what the big man upstairs is planning." And I said, "Well, the word stition in superstition literally means to stand. So if you say that we're God, what you're literally saying if you say we're Godstitious is in some sense you're saying we're standing in God, which of course, one, what a lovely thought, but two, that makes you sound super smart, right? To be able to say, the origin of that phrase in Latin, or the origin of that word in Latin, the etymology is from this particular thing. Yeah, that's awesome. I think everyone should have I genuinely think it would be impossible to have a society that is in any way degenerate where 90 to 100% of people speak Latin. It's not possible. Can you, try and envision a version of the UK that is an overall worse society, but 100% of the people there speak Latin? Okay, yeah, maybe if it's Catholic, but look, the point is that, I mean, to be honest, even then, as much as I might complain about it spiritually, it wouldn't be a worse society in terms of the material reality, I would imagine. So, yeah. Whereas, okay, then you imagine a society where everyone goes to school and all they learn about is how to get a job. I'm imagining in your head, probably immediately what you envision there was a dystopia. You don't even need me to tell you that there are many dystopian visions of the world where people learn. I think that's like a useful litmus test, right, for a political idea. Think to yourself, when you first imagine that, how many dystopian societies do you imagine where this would be the case compared to how many utopian societies? I think a lot of people say, actually, I'm not imagining many utopian societies where children just go to school and learn how to get a job. Whereas actually, if I imagine a society where children just go to school and they learn about history, the classics, basically just learn this kind of Greek philosopher's idea of what it would mean to be smart, that actually seems like it would be a much more utopian society. So yeah, strongly disagree. Oh, but I was going to say there's a complexity here. There is one complexity, right? I think we should massively reduce the number of universities in this country. Now, I do think universities should be very much focused on just being smart. So in that sense, insofar as that's part of schooling, I would say yes, that it continues into them. But the one thing which I have a interesting opinion on is that I do think that for the majority of children after secondary school, they should go to something that essentially is like university, in that they still get the university experience. They go out, they have all of the clubs, they dorm with friends, but it is entirely, exclusively focused on getting them a job. That essentially, obviously what we have now is most people go and they do a bachelor's for 3 years, and then they get out at the end of it, and maybe they haven't even found a job. But what I would support is 3 years of just the point of this time is to get a job, and that's it, to the exclusion of any other concern. So in that sense, I would say that I think that it is important that people get a job. But the thing is, I would actually say that's not part of education. I would call that the beginning. And this would be, by the way, when we can talk about how companies would start, companies would say, oh, we're offering training programs and stuff like that. So I think there should be that 3 year period where most students essentially say, you know what, this isn't really, the very smartest students go to university, but every other student who's just pretty average. And essentially, when I'm talking about the very smart students, I'm talking about students who are so smart that they will just basically the expectation is that they will be best-selling authors or podcast hosts or, go into academia themselves. Like basically people who are so smart that it's pretty much guaranteed that their smartness alone will mean they're okay. Anyone who falls short of that, the focus then has to switch to, all right, you're smart, awesome, but now let's focus on the next thing, which is making sure that you actually have a job, that you're able to, get a mortgage and all that kind of stuff. Right. So, and that's where people would learn about taxes, financial literacy, stuff like that. People with serious inheritable disabilities should not be allowed to reproduce. I want to say, so we're talking, again, here's the thing, right? They make this easier by making it more specific. I met someone who was like into eugenics. Like there are people who like would say, oh no, we should have eugenics where like shorter people aren't allowed to reproduce or taller people are encouraged to produce and stuff like, or reproduce. Problem is by saying serious, well, now I'm thinking about, situations where someone's life is either going to be incredibly short or they're going to spend their entire life in pain. And I'm going to say agree, right? I don't think if someone has a serious issue that's going to massively cause, and this isn't about like economic things. This is about if it was just economics, that would be fine. But this is about people living a genuinely worse quality of life. I think you could say in that specific situation, it's better for those people to have never been conceived. Now, there is the question of how do you enforce it? I mean, that's a different question, but it doesn't ask that. It just says, do I in principle agree with the idea that there should be some limitation on if you literally like someone who's whatever it is, like maybe you've got a 90% chance of your heart exploding before you're 50 or something. Should you be allowed to have a kid and bring a kid who's also going to have to grow up with that, bring up a kid who's also going to have to live with that like thing weighing on their mind? I would say no. Okay, this third section is much longer than the others. All right. So the most important thing for children to learn is to accept discipline. This is such an interesting thing because of the wording, right? Because I would say that discipline, self-discipline is incredibly important, right? The ability to get up early, the ability to manage your time well, the ability to sit there and read a book, even though you could be playing a video game, or the ability to stop scrolling social media. That is incredibly important. But I don't know if that's what this is saying when it says to accept discipline. If this is saying the ability to like just accept that what someone's going to tell you off and you've got to do whatever they say, no, that's rubbish. So I don't know. I guess I'm going to have to go for like mild disagree, because I do think that discipline is important, but when you say accept discipline, that sounds like you're talking about discipline coming from someone else, which I would say isn't good. But yeah, I absolutely think children should learn discipline, like mindfulness, meditation, stuff like that. That's got a huge amount of value. But yeah, again, it's the wording that's throwing me off here, because I could easily say agree there. I could even say strongly agree, right? Because I think discipline is incredibly important, but I'm not talking about punishment, which is what seems to be implied. You know what? I guess I'll just go on the wording, right? I mean, it says discipline. I support discipline. I won't go strongly agree, even though I could, but I will bump it up to agree, because I do think discipline is very important. Just not discipline in the sense of, being hit or whatever, or yelled at. There are no savage and civilized people. There are only different cultures. I think I'm already feeling like we're going to go for a mild disagree here, because I do think that actually, I agree with what like Ataturk said about how, there's only one civilized culture, the European culture. Not quite, but I do think that my idealized world is where like lots of the continents are basically just British. Like culturally, in terms of their values and stuff like that, they are British. Australasia, yeah, British. Africa, at least the like southern part of it, where, like the UK historically has precedent for existing. Yeah, I'd love that to be British. I think there are some cultures which absolutely should continue existing, because I just think it makes sense for them to exist. I guess like one of the things I would point out is I would say like there are some cultures which, because they never developed to become modern, we can only speculate as to what their like modern, less primitive existence would look like. And I would just say, well, why even bother with that? So for example, you could sit there and you could say, well, and look, let's talk about like the Congo or something like that. The Congo, let's be real here, they never built great libraries or skyscrapers. Like there's so many things that you would say are a hallmark of a civilization that they just never built. So if you then try to say, well, what would the Congo culture look like if it then became as developed as Western Europe? Well, and you're just making up, you're speculating. So in a way, why even bother with that like effort when you could just say, just copy ours, copy our culture. Our culture's like, it's doing pretty good. You can just have that. That's a freebie. So I guess I agree. There, I disagree rather, because I do think that I think savage and civilized are loaded terms, but I do think that there are some cultures which basically just they don't have a place in the future, I would say. And that's not even, like I said, it's not necessarily because they're evil intrinsically so, it's just because the nature of them having always been again, primitive. I think primitive is a much better word here than savage. The nature of them having always been primitive cultures means that you would have, they can't naturally develop into something else. So fundamentally you have to abandon them, right? Like if you have those Khoisan people in southern Africa who literally, like, they still hunt in like that old way of just like chasing down prey, like they don't even use like weapons or anything. And you'd ask me, what would it look like for those people to go to university and to get state-of-the-art medical care and to go to the cinema and watch films? There is no way that could happen while they remain the same culture. And I think that's the case for a lot of situations where there are just cultures that they would literally have to cease being that culture in order to implement even or introduce the basic standards of modernity. And as such, yeah, I would say that just doesn't really work. Those who are able to work and refuse the opportunity should not expect society's support. I think mild agree. It depends on your definition of work. It depends on like how degrading the work is. I think maybe we should have some degree of, I could almost go up to strongly agree, because I do think it is important, like to work doing something. Like I would say, and I almost can't imagine some working, but I suppose what I would say is if we're talking about, let's say, a drug addict, right, who just genuinely, like, they can't work because they've just totally, like, their values are totally out of whack. I think that person should get society's support by being sent to rehab, and that rehab could be publicly funded to some extent. So I think they can be supported, but as part of, oh, here's how we're going to address whatever it is that's going on with you that means that you are choosing not to work. Because a normal person should not be like that. Someone shouldn't just be like, you are not a mentally healthy person if you are just choosing not to do any work, even though you are capable of doing so, especially if you know it's going to dramatically decrease your standard of living. And yeah, I certainly don't think that anyone who's, like relying on society's support for you basically being lazy should expect to be living a top quality life. When you are troubled, it is better not to think about it, but to keep busy with more cheerful things. Should I say strongly disagree? I think I want to go, it's difficult because I think, like, obviously you shouldn't ruminate, but, obviously I kind of already said mindfulness, things like that, meeting your emotions where they are and acknowledging them and recognizing them is important. So in that sense, you should focus on it. But I would also say you shouldn't ruminate on it. You shouldn't dwell on it. So I guess I'm going to say disagree. You should think about it, but you shouldn't ruminate on it. So not strongly disagree, Kim. First generation immigrants can never be fully integrated within their new country. I'm going to say mild disagree. I think there is obviously an argument for why they could not be, but I think it depends how long how long they've been living there. I think it's a lot harder for them. But I also think it depends on the country. I would say a country that is much more value defined, like the UK, if you support freedom, if you support liberal democracy, if you are a Protestant, these are all things which I would say make you much more readily integratable into our specific country because you have those very unique values to us. What's good for the most successful corporation is always ultimately good for all of us. Strongly disagree. I mean, whatever. That's a freebie right there. No broadcasting institution, however independent in content, I read that again. No broadcasting institution, however independent its content, should receive public funding. Strongly disagree. I think that all broadcasting institutions should receive public funding because I don't think that we should have adverts. I think adverts are a bad thing for society. Maybe I think there should be some like HBO, pay-as-you-go, subscription service model stuff. What else? Yes, and the other thing is I also don't think it particularly matters that their content be independent. I think some of them should have independent content, but I also think it's perfectly fine that the state, like I say, as a in a liberal democracy, a representative of the public should have some say in what kind of content is in our media, because otherwise, you get all sorts of degeneracy, all sorts of slop. It's not good. I think the BBC produces very high quality content compared to other content I've seen. So yeah, why not? I mean, like HBO is kind of like considered one of the most prestige companies out there, and they often do collaborations with the BBC. So yeah, it seems to me like the BBC's got a good system. And like, for example, conversely, ITV, which literally I believe stands for Independent Television, it was the first non-public, which is to say commercial, TV show or TV channel in the UK, is associated with the worst kind of degenerate, like, lowest common denominator slop. So that kind of, I feel like, proves the point, right? That why actually having state funding is a good thing. So this is about how do you see wider society? Our civil liberties are being excessively curbed in the name of counterterrorism. Now, I have a incredibly controversial opinion, which at some point I will probably elaborate on with a video titled My Most Controversial Political Opinion. I literally have no problem with mass surveillance. It just doesn't bother me on a personal level. The idea of it just doesn't offend me or upset me. But the problem is, civil liberties, I do have a massive problem with people being detained without trial. I have a massive problem with torture. So I'm going to say, I guess I've got to say agree. I mean, I kind of want to say strongly agree because I'm really, really against detaining people without trial. I'm really, really against torture. But I know that a lot of people here, they're talking about things like, should the government be looking at Facebook groups or, like private WhatsApp chats and stuff to see if people are talking about planning a terrorist attack? And it's like, I don't care if they do that. I will say strongly agree, just because I do think that, it's probably excessive because terrorism isn't like a massive threat right now. But yeah, just that doesn't reflect. The funny thing is, like, it doesn't reflect that I'm probably answering that with hello. I'm making so many weird mouth noises. Anyway, it probably doesn't reflect the fact that I'm answering that without a mind towards what a lot of other people are likely thinking about when they answer that question. A significant advantage of a one-party state is that it avoids all the arguments to delay progress in a democratic political system. Stupid thing about the way this question is worded. I apologize, by the way. If you are watching this video first, then you probably don't appreciate the fact I'm recording this in one big block. So maybe it sounds like I'm, dead. That's because I have actually been recording already for as long as it took me to record the first part. Anyway, so stupidly worded question because someone could agree with this, but still be absolutely opposed to a one-party state. Because they might say, well, yeah, sure, it avoids all the arguments to delay progress, but nonetheless, we should absolutely have a democratic political system. So very stupidly worded, because I could literally say strongly agree, and yet simultaneously be utterly opposed to a one-party state. And like, it's kind of like if someone said, a significant benefit of fascism is that the aesthetic of it is kind of cool. It's like, well, someone could agree with that while being absolutely unequivocally opposed to fascism. Anyway, I guess I'll say agree. I could say strongly agree, but so I actually do think that we should, like if I were in charge of the UK, I would temporarily say, basically express that we're in a point of a national emergency. And I would say that temporarily certain like Magna Carta freedoms that we have should be suspended in the interest of like getting things done and fixing the situation as quickly as possible. But having said that, I would say generally speaking, unless you're in a situation of an absolute crisis, that shouldn't apply. And usually like all of the, going back and forth and really hashing out all the details is worthwhile. But yeah, I could literally say strongly agree and yet nonetheless be totally opposed to a one-party state in all circumstances because of the way the question is worded. It doesn't say, I support a one-party state because of this. It just says it is an advantage. So yeah, bad question. Although the electronic age makes official surveillance easier, only wrongdoers need to be worried. Okay, here it is. Yeah, strongly agree. Absolutely. If you're not, look, nothing to hide, nothing to fear, right? It's pretty simple. What I would say more to the point is, it's not so much that only wrongdoers need to be worried. It's that if you are not, like, if you are not doing something wrong and you are being subject to issues from the state based on your actions, then the goal there should be to change the laws, right? Because technically speaking, I do something wrong every single time I drive on the motorway. I believe the legal speed limit on the motorway is 70 miles an hour. But I, and almost every single other person on the motorway, drives faster than that. But, and the thing is, so let's say that they put up speed cameras all along the motorway. Well, the thing there is it's not so much, yeah, like obviously if they see the camera, or like if I get taken a picture and I'm like, oh, you did something wrong, we're going to punish you. But the thing is, what I would say there is the problem isn't the surveillance, it's the law, right? Like that's my attitude. When it comes to people who are concerned about, mass surveillance, they'll always say, well, you could be arrested for an offensive tweet. Oh, you could be arrested for, just loitering or whatever. Like basically you think there's some illegitimate law. But what I would say is, well, the thing is, in that way, having mass surveillance should motivate us to seek to change the law, meaning that mass surveillance would only need to be used to enforce laws that are good, laws that we all agree we should have, in which case, why would you need to fear? If anything, you should feel much safer because you now live in a society where the laws we all agree that ought to be followed to make society as maximally safe as possible are going to be properly enforced, because anyone who's doing those bad things, there will immediately be incriminating evidence of them doing that. So yeah, I genuinely, I don't understand why anyone who is like, there's really only two situations. Either you are not doing something immoral that ought to be prohibited in society, in which case, what's your concern? Or you are, in which case, well, stop doing that. Or the third option is you're doing something that you're not doing something that ought to be prohibited, but that thing still is prohibited, in which case the solution there is to oppose the thing being prohibited. And the best way to do that is to create a situation where the government has the capacity to enforce all their laws, so we can then start focusing on the important matter of what laws should they actually be enforcing. Hey everyone, so if you remember last time I said it was my wife's birthday whilst it was going up, and I was hoping to record this morning, just to, get it done. But yeah, we had to take a moment to do presents, and she loved my present I got her. I got her some chocolate pretzels. I got her a picnic basket, and in the picnic basket there were chocolate pretzels and all sorts of different picnic utilities for a lovely picnic together. So there we go, that's her birthday. Now, let's do this. So, the death penalty should be an option for the most serious crimes. My instinct is to say strongly disagree. I must admit there are some real evil people out there, like war criminals and stuff like that. For me, like, that's what it is. Everyone, like I say, well, I don't know if I said this in the previous part, kind of applies this to like sex criminals and stuff. So honestly, like in those cases, I genuinely just, as I said before, I don't understand it. So it's kind of like it almost doesn't offend me as much as, for example, somebody like Tony Blair, I don't think he has any excuse. He literally just chose to invade a country for no reason and murder 200,000 people. That is, like, that in that context, I'd be like, maybe we should have the death penalty. But I am very against the death penalty. But I think I'll say disagree, because it's not like there's moments where I would be really, really strongly tempted to be like, no, we should have the death penalty. This person is genuinely so evil. I don't think we should have it for like normal people situations. I'm talking about like world leaders who do crimes against humanity. That's where it should be in consideration. But for just everyday crimes committed by an average person, whatever. In a civilized society, one must always have people above to be obeyed and people below to be commanded. So I think I'm going to go for a mild disagree here. Pretty simple logic here. Basically, I do think I tend to agree with the idea that society should be egalitarian, but I don't think society can ever be perfectly equal. So yes, obviously you shouldn't have, and I would contrast this to, I would say conservative and fascist thinking. There is like an underclass in society who basically their job is just to, have a terrible life because that's like what they're supposed to experience. Whereas I would absolutely disagree with that. And the only place where I would say we should have like a thing is that some people I think are smarter than other people. Some people have better abilities, and I wouldn't say that necessarily being in charge or disobeying speaks to being in charge or being obedient speaks to an inequality. I think people can be equal even while one person might be more capable of taking charge in a situation or just more inclined to take charge in a situation. Abstract art that doesn't represent anything shouldn't be considered art at all. Again, another mild disagree. So essentially, I do think that there is, obviously there is the fact of like, well, in some sense, anyone could do it. It's not that impressive. Having said that, I do think this kind of meta idea of what actually is art is in itself an artistic question. So in that, these abstract pieces have you wondering, well, like, what does this even mean? Like, what is this supposed to be about? Why has this person done this? I think that necessarily makes it art. I would say it's worse often than other art. But I mean, the other thing I would say is that I'm not a huge fan. I think the advent of photography has made art that is literally just landscapes and just images of things that you see in everyday life. I think that has become less worthy of being considered art as time has gone on, because you can just take a picture of it, right? Like, that is very technically proficient if you can paint a beautiful Yellowstone landscape or whatever, but someone else could just go to Yellowstone and take a picture of it, and they produce the exact same thing that you have. And therefore, that's always kind of made me lean towards, like, I would say my favorite style of art is surrealism. I guess is what, Dadaism? Is that like a type of that? I'm not sure. But yeah, basically the type of art where you're still using the technical skill, but you are depicting something which you could not be something that you just capture on camera. I think that is interesting. But I will admit there is a beauty to art that does just capture what we would see physically. But I think part of it, I enjoy the stylized nature of art, like that kind of like old Japanesey style of painting where you're not getting exactly what you would see if you took a photo. Like to me, the when you literally just paint and it literally looks as if it might as well be a photo, that is something which is incredibly technically impressive, but in terms of art, it's actually not that interesting because it's just like, okay, well, it just looks like the thing that you tried to take a photo of. So in that sense, I'm kind of a bit more inclined towards abstract art, and I at least find it more interesting because it doesn't just look like the thing that you like took a photo of. Like if someone draws a lot of abstract shapes, well, there's at least quite realistically like nothing I've ever seen before. But yeah, of course, that whole thing about photography replacing I don't know what the word is for it, but the kind of, is it literally just like classical art, like the art that's just looks like the thing that it's supposed to be a painting of? I don't know whether or not AI would similarly, in replacing certain styles of art, change what we consider art going forward, because yeah, like I say, I think people nowadays aren't as interested in just painting what you see because of the advent of cameras. Who knows how like the advent of AI could change things. In criminal justice, punishment should be more important than rehabilitation. I'm going to say disagree again. I'm so one note here, because the reason why I'm not going to say strongly disagree is, so obviously I do support rehabilitation. I think it's important. The thing is, I would say this. I think because I tend to project my mind forward towards a more perfect society, and I'm always answering these questions not in terms of what do I think is the case now, but what do I think life would be like in the best possible world. And in that world, I think the only reason someone would commit a crime is because they are fundamentally evil. Because I'm imagining, like, I'm kind of, what I'm saying before is building on top of what I've said now. So I'm imagining a world where we've kind of redressed employment issues. I'm imagining a world where we're giving children a good education and they are obligated to go. I'm imagining a world where we have cracked down on drug usage. And therefore, what I'm now thinking is, well, in this world, who is the type of person who would nonetheless commit a crime? And such a person is not someone who is capable of being rehabilitated, because such a person must just, you'd think, be a totally evil person. Whereas in our current society, yes, rehabilitation is incredibly important, because there are so many people who aren't evil people, but they were just raised in a really rubbish way. So, yeah, I'm going to put mild disagree. I mean, punishment, I think, is kind of pointless, because ultimately it doesn't actually solve anything. So, I mean, again, what I said before is that I think containment is a very important part of the criminal justice system. So it is a waste of time to try to rehabilitate some criminals. That's a very directly relevant thing, but it allows me to break my streak. I'm going to say agree. I almost could go strongly agree. I think there are some criminals who literally I kind of said this about like pedophiles. I just feel like it's very difficult for me to imagine how you would go about rehabilitating them such that you could be confident to release them into the world again. So honestly, what I kind of, in my head, I feel like we do just need, not necessarily even like horrible places, but just communities, communes, where basically you just have these criminals who are just saying like, you know what, they will get to live out the rest of their natural life in a position of like relative peace and serenity and just doing what they want with their lives, but they just can't ever be allowed back into society. I think like monasteries are what I like to imagine when I think about people being convicted in prison, especially long term, where these people who are pedophiles, what we should be doing is just, you put them in their little houses, they have their schedule, and essentially the only thing you can do is say, like, give them discipline, give them like stuff to read, like basically try to build them up as people, but accept the fact that when it comes to their sexual proclivities, I don't know if we can ever be confident we can change that, and as such we should just keep them in there, never to come out again. That's kind of my stance. So I'm going to upgrade to a strongly agree, because in that case, I do think, like, while in some sense you could say that is trying to rehabilitate them because we're trying to make them better people, the specific thing that they're in prison for, I don't think there's a solution to that. And that's kind of my stance on like sex criminals. I just think that at the end of the day, it is pointless to get mad about it because it's clear they're just wired so differently that it's like, they're literally just broken people, which is fine. In that is a justification for us to keep them in prison forever. But I just don't see the point of getting mad at them when what we should be doing is just saying, essentially, I guess what I would say is, how like on death row, a big part of it is, like obviously they have all the kind of religious people coming in to minister them. It's just getting them ready for the next life. I kind of view there should be some prisoners who essentially they're on death row, but the execution method will be death by old age. And that's kind of my attitude towards, really serious sex crimes. You're on death row. It's just we're not going to be the ones who kill you. It's going to be, time will take eventually. But in the meantime, it's just about preparing that person to say, do you understand what you've done is wrong? Do you understand why you need to be departing this earth with a recognition of that? And just trying to drill that idea into their heads. All right. The business person and the manufacturer are more important than the writer and the artist. I gotta say strongly disagree. But then I'm like, well, I don't know, because it's kind of like, it is contextual, right? Because, in a disaster scenario, obviously we're going to want, the people who, business person, no, but manufacturer, we're going to want people capable of doing manufacturing right away. If there's a post-apocalypse scenario, I remember David Mitchell, who's a very popular comedian on panel shows, which is important because he says basically he's talking about like, if I was in a post-apocalyptic scenario, I would just kill myself right away. Because do you have any idea in that society how long it's going to be until people need comedy panel shows? And I thought that was kind of like a really funny way of putting it. And it's kind of the same for me, right? Like, I think what I do is, like, I would say David Mitchell, I think what he does is he's given entertainment to millions of people with his contribution. I'm sure a lot of you know who David Mitchell is, and if you don't, like, check out Would I Lie to You? Obviously, I guess you've seen Peep Show as well. Given entertainment to many people, that's an incredibly valuable thing. In some sense, it's brought more joy to people's lives than any singular manufacturer has, because they just produce, like, one thing to be used by one person. David Mitchell, like, has produced hundreds of hours of entertainment that's enjoyed by millions of people. But then obviously in another sense, of course, no one's going to actually want to have that. Like, that's not going to be something that we are caring about in a desperate situation. It's the same thing with what I do. Like, at the end of the day, if we, post-apocalyptic scenario, no one's going to be like, what we need is someone to criticize trans identity and, like other pseudo intellectuals and things like that. But the thing is, like I say, so in that sense, it is more important But I would say because we don't live in that society, because we live in a society where actually we're starting to recognize that the whole Maslow's hierarchy of needs matters, not just fulfilling the basic level of like food and shelter and stuff like that. In that sense, I think we can still say strongly disagree, because there is a huge amount of value that intellectuals and artistic people bring to people's lives, a huge amount of fulfillment that, yeah, without that, yeah, sure, it would, like basically we're living a much more impoverished life. Yeah, I'm reasonably comfortable. I think you could definitely make an argument that this is maybe more of a disagree than a strongly disagree, but whatever. I got so tired of like, there were so many in a row that I just felt like I was disagreeing with, and I was like, I don't want to go back to that. I had that brief moment of moving away from it. Okay, so mothers may have careers, but their first duty is to be homemakers. So there's kind of some complexities here in that the question is, like, this is only a matter of considering complementarianism or chauvinism, if you like, if we are saying that men, this is not true of men. Because I would say, well, raising children is incredibly important. It is perhaps, for those who do choose to raise children, more important than their careers. But I would not distinguish that between mothers and fathers. Now, having said that, I would also say like homemakers. For me, that is, I've always thought that's like a kind of redundant job. I just don't think that, you know, people like the home needs that much making. So I'm reasonably happy to put this as a. I'm quite confident putting this as a strong disagree. I am pro family, but it's just the fact that it's like very specific to mothers, and also the fact that to me, I would say maybe even then it's not your first duty. Like it is an important thing, but at the end of the day, I feel like I guess it's this conception of being a parent as work that I'm not like a huge fan of. So I don't know, whatever. I'll say strong disagree again. Maybe you could say it's disagree, because I, in some sense, would say that it is very. You know, actually, I'll put disagree just because. Oh, hello, click wrong one. Disagree, yeah. Okay, so almost all politicians promise economic growth, but we should heed the warnings of climate. I read that so I read that as element. Of climate science that growth is detrimental to our efforts to curb global warming. I'm going to say strongly agree. I could say agree, so I'll explain the obvious pro. One, I'm anti-consumerist. I'm anti this idea of growth. I like the quote that growth at all costs is the ideology of a cancer cell. I think that's a really good way of putting it. The idea we should always be aiming to grow, constantly doing everything bigger and using more resources and all that kind of stuff. It's stupid. I would also say that, you know, climate, we should be very concerned about the climate. I think that's a legitimate thing to be concerned about. The two things I'd say against it is, one, I think that there are other concerns beyond, like basically global warming. So the problem is the focus on global warming, I don't really agree with, because again, pollution, right? The question of, should we build 100 coal-powered factories because it's the cheapest way to increase our industrial output right next to a residential area? You are being asked the question, do you want to directly strap up a combustion engine and just inhale it directly into your lungs? You're being asked that question. The answer should be obvious. So again, to make it about global warming, I feel like that's missing the issue. There's so much more to pollution and our damage to the environment than global warming. And also simply the fact that there are limited resources. So I kind of disagree in terms of putting a focus on global warming. I would also say I don't really like the idea of people who think of global warming or tackling global warming in terms of having to limit what we do. You know, at the end of the day, I think that we can still use a lot of energy, still use a lot of power, and not damage the environment, because I think we can just be more intelligent. I think managing the climate is a lot more complicated than just, start taking cold showers and, don't run the dishwasher, or maybe do run the dishwasher because apparently it's more efficient. But, basically this idea of it's all about what we're not allowed to do in terms of using energy. I think that there are better ways to talk about helping the environment than that. Having said that, I think I'm still going to lock in strongly agree, because while I think those are two things that make me have an issue with the slight wording of it, I would generally say pro-environment, anti-consumerist is very much my political philosophy. So since I'm very committed to that, yeah. Making peace with the establishment is an important aspect of maturity. Is it strongly disagree or is it a disagree? I think that the problem is, again, it's a question of, well, if you're just against the establishment even when the establishment is good, obviously that's very dumb. But if you believe that someone should make peace with the establishment even when the establishment is very bad, I don't think it is an important part. I'm going to assume this is talking about basically people saying that you should, as you get older, become more cynical, become less idealistic, become more convinced that nothing you do will ultimately matter. And as such, I think that this is bad. I'm not about it. Basically, I'm going to say strongly disagree. I'm going to lock in some stronglys. I haven't been doing that many in this, but I really think that's not a part of it. I would say the implication of this is way too much that regardless of whether the establishment is good or bad, you ought to make peace of it. And to me, that's just telling people to become cynical, telling people to give up hope, telling people to become fatalists. And of course, I don't agree with that. If you got through that, okay, you'll find these propositions on religion a breeze. Well, we'll see if I find it breeze. I will say, now there is a chance that based on how long it took, I've worked on the assumption it will take me half the time to do the first 3 pages, half the time to do the next 3 pages. If that ends up not being true, then obviously I will cut it somewhere else that makes more sense. So if it seemed like when I cut between, like when I ended the first video and when I started the second video, didn't appear to fully line up with like my recording sessions, even though I've kind of just done this one big session, but I did have a break, then that is, well, I hope this explains that. And also, on the subject of things being changed, I am literally just about to run out of space on this camera card, so I will now... Alright, so... I don't know, I feel like I'm slightly misaligned. Okay, I guess I'm over here, something like that, whatever. Alright, so I had to switch around my camera, so that's sorted. And here is the old one. This is filled now with me answering these questions. So, religion. Oh, we've got an advert up. Let's do this. Okay, so astrology accurately explains many things. Strongly disagree. Yeah, I think we'll get through this maybe quite quick. You cannot be moral without being religious. This is one of those things that a lot of people a lot of people get confused around this point because a lot of people think this is what's being said when the moral argument for religion is made. The moral argument for religion is not claiming you can't be moral without being religious. It's saying you cannot have an ultimate standard for morality without being religious. And those are two very different things because you can be consistent with a standard without having that standard. For example, just because you have no sense of taste doesn't mean that you aren't capable of making good meals. So the answer is I kind of have to go strongly disagree because you absolutely can be moral without being religious. Well, I'll go for a mild disagree because I do think that if there is a God, then I think you could argue we have a moral obligation to acknowledge that and things like that. I'd also say that it's maybe harder because you might not have as much of a sense of purpose. I mean, I could easily go strongly disagree. Partially, I'm annoyed because I know that a lot of people, like, if the question was, you cannot have an ultimate objective standard for goodness without being religious, that is a slightly different question than can you be moral. You know what, just to please the I'll say strongly disagree. I think that you basically can, again, can you be perfectly moral? Well, no, but even I can't, that's a silly way of saying it. But even the most religious person in the world can't be perfectly moral because, well, obviously you could say the most religious person in the world is Jesus. Obviously he was the most, let's say, religious mortal in the world can't be perfectly moral. So no one can be perfectly moral, but by the standards of society, how moral you are seems to not really relate to whether or not you're religious. So, charity is better than social security as a means of helping the genuinely disadvantaged. Strongly disagree. So I mentioned this in my video about why I don't like taxes. Why I like high taxes, the exact opposite of what I just said, because charity basically rewards people for being selfish. Because if we live in a world where everything was governed by charity, then the people who just say, I don't care about homeless people, I don't care about starving people, I don't care about people who are sick and diseased and dying, I'm just going to look after all my own money and spend everything I want on myself, that person ends up better off in a society governed by charity instead of taxation, and I think that is deeply unfair. I also feel we often recognize that people are quite irrational with how they give to charity. Of course, lots of people give money to individual homeless people, even though that is a far less effective way of helping homeless people than giving to homeless shelters. Because if you give to a homeless person, you know, something I've always said is people say, oh, that homeless person is just going to spend money on drugs and drink. It's like, well, why shouldn't they? What else are they supposed to be doing? Like investing the money sensibly? No, they're a homeless person. So actually giving a individual homeless person money, I think is stupid because there's not much that some random individual homeless person on the street can do with that. Whereas if you give that money to a homeless shelter, maybe they have programs that can actually help homeless people in a much more meaningful sense. But the problem is still, people give money to homeless people because that makes them feel guilty. That makes them feel bad. So that's, I think, the other problem. Charity, I think, tends to be much more about emotionality than rationality. And I don't think that is actually helpful for solving problems. Some people are naturally unlucky. Strongly disagree. That's total nonsense. It is important that my child's school instills religious values. Strongly agree. Yes. It's important that everyone's child's schools instills religious values. So that's quite a big, but that's the thing. So it kind of follows from, this is why you probably benefit from watching the first part. Something I said is I think that it's important that as a society, we have shared values, we have a shared culture, we have shared, I would use the word myths, obviously using that in a religious context is kind of unfortunate, but the point is I actually do think that children at school should learn that Christianity is true. I think in the UK, we should, one of the objectives of school should be to teach children that Christianity is true. So never mind religious values, I would say, you know, religious belief. That's my position because I think that society is good and therefore we should encourage things that tend to lead to more social cohesion. Finally, I'll look at sex. Sex outside marriage is usually immoral, strongly agree. A same-sex couple... See, the thing is, a lot of this is like kind of... it's stuff where it's a lot more axiomatic, so I don't know if I'll need to actually explain much of this stuff, because if I just say, well, I agree, you can kind of just... Like, that's pretty much the explanation, right? Do I agree with it? Yes. A same-sex couple in a stable, loving relationship should not be excluded from the possibility of child adoption. Agree. I don't know about strongly agree. Obviously, it's one of those things where I don't know. I am not gay. I do not know what's going on in a gay man's brain. For all I know, gay people are more of a threat. Like, I don't know. Maybe they are actually more of a threat to children. Because obviously one thing we know is that homosexuality is rare. It is not the typical way that people develop. So you have to ask the question, well, if it is an irregularity in that way, what other more concerning ways might it be an irregularity? However, I've said before that I think that unless you're going to go hardcore and say that, like, we should make being gay illegal, if we're going to say that being gay should be part of society, then certainly it should be integrated into society in a way that is consistent with our values and traditions. And to me, that means monogamous, faithful marriage. And I think that is a strong foundation for a family. And therefore, I think it would be missing a trick in principle if we were to not allow gay couples to adopt children who might want to be growing up in a stable family. So my instinct is to say that it is a good thing for children who would otherwise be raised by nobody, would be in foster homes, or does foster, like, basically the homes where they have to share it with, like basically orphanages, that instead they get raised by a family, even if that family is two gay men. However, and yeah, I'm kind of ignoring the issue of lesbians. Kind of everything applies there, but, you know, it's just a different situation. However, yeah, I don't know whether or not there is a risk that comes with that. I think that is something that we should not be... Because even if you as an individual... Like, obviously the question here is about averages. Is there a possibility that, on average, gay couples are more likely to be a threat? Simply because that is a different dynamic. It implies a different psychology when it comes to sex. Maybe there's a risk there. Maybe it's the opposite. Maybe they're less likely to be a threat. Obviously, we know of the standout horror cases, like there was that gay couple that adopted children specifically with the purpose of sexually abusing them. But, you know, are we going to pretend that's never happened in different contexts? Are we going to say that one example is representative of something? So yeah, that's basically my stance. I think it should be okay. I think it should be a good thing. There might need to be more, like kind of more oversight with it, just more of a mind towards, what's the word, more safeguarding. That's what I'm thinking. Pornography depicting consenting adults should be legal for the adult population. It's either strongly disagree or mildly disagree. I think that the reason why I'm leaning towards mildly disagree is because you do get into a situation of like, what exactly is pornography? And like some of it's, I would say that online pornography is especially dangerous because of the fact that it's so desensitizing. The fact that you can see so much of it so easily and it's so graphic. I think that is a problem, but I don't think anyone can handle that. Having said that, if we're talking like, you know, you go to, like back in the olden days, you go to a video store and get a video. That's kind of a different situation because at least then you don't have the immediate access to it. It's not as risky. I could go strongly disagree because like for me personally, I do think it's like there's no benefit to it. You know, I'm going to do strongly disagree. I think I can do strongly disagree because I think actually if we're talking about ideal society, people shouldn't be doing that work in the first place. And I think, yeah, sure, you could say, well, what about like AI? Like basically, unless you're implying like like the standard is this complete clean sweep of everything that could be considered even vaguely pornographic. Well, that's one thing, but I don't think we need to worry about it. I think here the implication is this is really talking about cases where there's obviously no doubt it's pornographic. In those cases, I think, yeah, there's no benefit to having that in society. And I think there are certainly downsides, both in the production and the consumption of it. What goes on in a private bedroom between consenting adults is no business of the state. Well, it's one of those things, right, where it's like, well, what if it's, consenting, actually. Sorry, I forgot the consenting. I have to say strongly agree. You know, I think, at the end of the day, I think maybe you could say, well, it's a business of the state and that the state should be encouraging certain behaviors because there are certain behaviors which I think are more conducive to happy relationships, which means more conducive to, stable relationships, means more conducive to stable families, and that is better for society. So I think I'll knock that down to an agree, actually, because I think it makes me sound like a bit too much of a, I suppose a liberal, if I were to say, oh, it's no business. No, I think like we should have some investment in the idea that there are certain behaviors that actually can, in the attitudes they maybe engender in couples, be kind of like reverberate out through society in a way that's kind of harmful. But the act itself, I don't think is a problem. Like at the end of the day, if two people want to get together and do whatever in a bedroom, doesn't affect me. But I think that I would still say the state shouldn't just completely wash their hands of it and say, you know what, we don't care if people are doing all of like sorts of depraved things. Because actually maybe we should at least try to instill values in people that make them less likely to do those things. Let's see, no one can feel naturally homosexual. The answer here is I don't know, but I will disagree mildly because I don't really know. I don't feel naturally homosexual. I guess maybe some other people do, but I have no idea. So, yeah, these days openness about sex has gone too far. Mildly agree. I think it can be a bit intense, but at the same time, I do think it's probably good that we have slightly more like willingness to talk about this issue openly. So yeah, I think that's good. Now we're going to see where I stand. Now I will say this. The last time I did this, somewhere actually this still exists. I wonder if I can find it. I might be able to find the last time I actually filled this in. So I will bring it up now. I'm looking at it right now. These are, interestingly, I did them several times in early 2012, the first half of 2012, twice in March, where I moved, and then again in June. And as you can see, I was very far economically left the first time I did it, and then the next two times I was the same amount. And I actually, so it's kind of interesting in a way. So basically the first time, even though I took them only 13 days apart, somehow I ended up getting significantly more socially libertarian. But as you can see, I'm right in the bottom left corner. That is obviously not going to be, I mean, you just saw how I answered a lot of these questions. That is not going to be the case here. I think it's incredibly likely I will be in the top left. I might be just towards the upper side of the bottom left. There's no way I'd be very surprised I'm not to the left. But yeah, as you can see, interestingly, I actually no. Okay, so I was still pretty libertarian in June. It's interesting that, I mean, I must have just answered them like basically just differences of strongly versus thingy. I don't know why I did it so many times in such quick succession. I guess I was just really into it at that point. I mean, this would have been when I was first starting to come up with my political ideas. But yeah, I definitely think it's fair to say I've changed quite a bit. So let's do it. Let's see where I stand. So it explains the political compass. Authoritarian, left, cool. Libertarian. Yeah, I don't think we need to read all of this. So North Korea is very high up there, China's very high up there, Saudi Arabia's over there, Singapore's over there, Uruguay, Switzerland, just some random countries, I guess. Interesting. Okay. Economic left-right, social libertarian. Okay. It's kind of like, when you look at it, it's actually kind of boring, right? Even though I feel like I have some pretty out there political ideas in some ways. And I think I would, I don't know, see, in both cases, like when it comes to authoritarian versus libertarian, there are some things about me that are very authoritarian. Like I say, I literally don't even care about mass surveillance or anything like that. Having said that, I do have a very strong belief in the importance of individual rights when it comes to things like being free from torture, being free from, being detained without charge. So I guess I'm kind of in the middle, but that obviously doesn't fully communicate the fact that I am actually quite extremely authoritarian on some points, but quite extremely libertarian on some other points. I'm not really surprised I ended up in the middle, but yeah, I guess I'm technically still lib left. So there's your confirmation. Quite far to the left. Not that surprising. Again, it's sort of funny because a lot of like my really hardcore left beliefs just didn't really come up there. Like my strong belief in collectivism wasn't really mentioned at all. The whole like employment versus inflation thing, I don't even know which side of that was supposed to be left or right, but yeah, whatever. So, claim your free political compass certificate. I don't think I need that. Okay. I don't know who that guy is, but okay. So, yeah, nothing. I'm not going to give them the donation. I don't think it was particularly worth my money. But yeah. Okay, and then this is just nonsense. I'd be interested in, like, tell you what, they got enough adverts, you'd think they wouldn't need my money. Alright. Yeah. I'd be interested, so let's look, actually, at where people stood in the 2024 British election. This is what we want to know. So we can determine, who should I have voted for? So where am I? Here I am, and here are my options. SDLP. So for the record, I support, if they ran where I live, I would very much favour the Workers' Party GB or the Green Party. And as you can see, I'm pretty close to both. I'm closest of all to Workers' Party GB, I guess, and that would cohere with the fact that they are the ones I would most enthusiastically support. But I don't mind the Greens, obviously, unsurprisingly, I think they're a bit too liberal on some social issues. There we go, I guess that's it. That felt like a long road to basically just, like, that you look at it and you just realize, yeah, okay, cool, okay. It's also one of those things where it just feels, because I know that I'm saying like a lot of nuanced, different takes, and I have all sorts of various opinions on stuff, but at the end of the day, all of that just gets reduced down to, oh, you're kind of like in the middle, basically. Yeah. Way to the left, obviously. Alright. So I guess I'm gone. The second half was nothing like as long as the first half, actually, so yeah, the division point is going to be way off from where I was expecting it to be. I'll see you all later. Have a good day, and bye. Oh, sorry, also Patreon stuff. If there's a clip, you'll see a clip now.
Xenogenders are a subset of non-binary genders that, as originally defined by trans Tumblr user Baphomet, quote, cannot be contained by human understandings of gender, more concerned with crafting other methods of gender categorization and hierarchy.
Sorry, what do you mean cannot be contained by human understandings of gender? So, For who's like, that's another way where this is not similar, because one of the things about gender, and most words we use, by the way, is that they exist so that we can understand things. Like, even if you are like a gender abolitionist, I think you would still recognize that the category of gender has some utility in our current society, where we can say certain things are masculine, certain things are feminine, and that's basically the same for everything that we use and talk about in language. It's there so that we can understand it. So the moment that you're admitting that you've invented a category that goes beyond human understandings of gender, which, by the way, gender is a social construct, what's even the point in it? How can you say we have a way of conceiving of a social construct that goes beyond society's understandings of it? Well, at that point, it's not even part of the social construct, is it? And yeah, I guess next time you see me will be just a regular video, and let me know what you thought in the comments and how crazy you think I am. Bye!